Well, listeners, if you're tuning back in, welcome back to Destination Aviation. And if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome to Destination Aviation. I'm Jeff Miller, your host. I appreciate a few things that have happened here more recently. I put out this podcast to my network, as people that have listened to this for a while now know that I've been doing it for over a year now, but I, have been working to refine it. You can go back to some of the earlier episodes and listen to how it started. And like I said, we kind of peel and take, and I think everything kind of sits there in a sense of ecosystem of how this was produced over the last year and a half to kind of result to where we are now. But I've had an outpouring of support from people that I know in the industry. So I wanted to say, one, thank you to all of them. And thank you to everyone that has reached out to me to do interviews on this podcast. The network out there is great. There's so many people doing amazing things in our industry. And so as we're lining this up, it will give an opportunity, one, for people to listen to somebody else talk besides my ramblings on here. I have a lot of opinions, but I'm sure some people will want to hear others. And so I really appreciate, one, the outpouring of support. And some of those airport folks out there, we have a good sense of humor. I've had some jokes sent my way, and that's okay. I like those too, and I still like those people. So thank you so much for the outpouring support there. What really we get into here today is our really first true guest. And our guest today is Patrick Carreno, who is the Director of Aviation for the Dallas Airport System. Patrick and I have known each other now for about 15 years, and we'll get into some of that. I really wanted him to be the first guest on this podcast. Patrick began as not only my boss, then we were co-workers, but really over the last 15 years, I was categorized as friends. He may say differently here in a little bit. Well, we'll find out. So without further ado, we'll get right into our conversation with Patrick Carreno of the Dallas Airport System. Well, as we said in the beginning there, we're here with Patrick Carreno of the Dallas Airport System. I hope I got that right, Patrick, because I know it says Dallas Love on your profile, but I believe you manage the whole system, correct?
Well, yeah, thanks, Jeff. It's nice to be here. We go by a lot of different terms. Dallas Airport System, not to be confused with Dallas Fort Worth International, is not us. Dallas Love Field, largest medium hub airport commercial in the country, and then we have a reliever airport down in the south part of Dallas, in Dallas Executive, and then we actually have a vertiport on top of the convention center that we manage.
So I'm going to ask you a dumb question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You on top of the convention center?
I'm sorry. That's okay, Jeff.
No. Yeah, Patrick and I know each other. He didn't get to hear the intro.
The Dallas Airport System. We're a department of the city of Dallas, but we go by a lot of different names. But that is us.
So at the beginning, and you'll hear this if you ever listen to this episode, I don't know if you plan to or not, but I said you were my boss, and then we worked together for a while, and then at this point, I consider us friends, but I let the listeners know you may differ on that. You can tell me no.
Well, it depends on the setting, but generally I refer to you as a friend.
That seems fair. That's fair.
I think we have an interesting background where we've had some interesting times, right? We started in Stockton, California.
Yes,
so
we have.
At our beginning.
We have. No, that's where we first met in 2010 of all years. So it's been
2010,
quite
15 years.
Yeah, quite the journey. I think up front, one, thank you. You're our first guest. And I wanted you to be our first guest because, quite honestly, I don't have probably as great a conversation with people in this industry as I do with you, and that says nothing against future guests, because they may be amazing. But I do know if you're on the show, it's going to be a good show, because you're not robotic, which I know in our industry we tend to see that a lot. And the way, if people have listened to this podcast, is I am more free-flowing, and I've always appreciated your approach into the industry. So thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with us. And quite honestly, I think the way we've talked about it a little bit, open it up to what you want to discuss, but I kind of thought was, how you got into the industry, where you started, and getting up to the point now where you're in charge of the largest medium hub airport in the U.S., potentially about to be a large hub. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're on the cusp there. And, follow up on what you said. I mean, just thanks for having me. And obviously, you and I talk a lot, and I feel honored to be the first one here, and you've set the bar high here for me. So hopefully I don't bore you too much here.
I think you're sweetening me up for a free podcast sticker. I don't know. Maybe I'll send one to you.
You know, I like the free swag, so
you don't have to butter me up.
Right?
I'm gonna put that postage stamp on there for you. It'll be heading to Dallas tomorrow.
That's
Anyways,
perfect.
So how did you get into the industry?
You know, let me see. Let's go back to 2001, and I was a senior in college in Florida Tech, right?
So, wait, do you know the IT department at Dallas Love? I'm kidding.
Yeah. Anyway, it was right down the road from the premier aviation or aeronautical university in the world, the top one of one. Yes, we were right down the road in Melbourne, not in Daytona Beach. We somehow navigate the industry, but our peers at Embry-Riddle, obviously, we are very respectful of them. I know you are a esteemed graduate and alumni of Embry-Riddle.
I am. I'll be the first to admit. I think typically you guys beat us in the anything aeronautical stuff, as far as where they would fly around, right, in the teams, and they had to do certain calculations for fuel and blah blah blah, all that stuff. I wasn't a part of that. But I'm pretty sure you guys used to beat us most of the time when it was up against FIT. And if anybody's listening from Embry-Riddle, you can school me if I'm wrong on that.
Well, you know, and it was a long time ago, so probably, who knows?
It was. I mean, we were back then. What would that be? Listening to your Nelly CD rolling in 2001. It's okay. So we have Patrick in Florida. It's 2001. Nelly's on the stereo. Southwest Florida. What? Okay. Let's just say, how'd you end up there? What made you say aviation?
All right, so peeling it back more. So for me, I mean, I think, you know, a lot of the folks that went to school for aviation management and fell in the airport side, we have like a very similar story. There was something that like interests us, plane wise, like airplane wise, right? For me, I think it was growing up, my grandfather flying for TWA out of jail, you know, based out of New York, and you're a kid and you see this, you know, flying, you know, in the 80s and 90s was a little different than flying today. It was a very, you know, kind of romanticized thing, and you're flying around the world and you get dressed up to fly. And, you know, so I think it was just, you know, seeing the travel and the different places and these big jets flying around, and it's really cool, and you kind of fall into that, right? And then so looking, you know, in high school and things like that, and then I came out, I was like, you know what, I want to be like designing and engineering and around this stuff. And then I fell into University of Buffalo my freshman year and aerospace engineering, and it was terrible, and I hated engineering. And no offense to engineers, but I'm not an engineer, and I quickly figured that out. And I think the pivot was the flying side, right? And then there's these back then. There was very, you know, not that I'm that old, but in the mid to late 90s, the internet is not what it was. So you figured there was like 4 or 5 schools out there that did these things, and it was like Florida Tech, Embry-Riddle, Auburn, Arizona State, Purdue, I think was probably the list. And there's a lot more now, but, you know, in visiting the program, and, you know, said, hey, this is probably a good fit. I'm going to be a pilot, right? And I'm going to get a bachelor's degree in aviation management. So fast forward to 2001, and I'm, you know, lining up my career as, you know, captain on a wide body and traveling the world, and how glamorous that's going to be. And 9/11 happened, right? And 9/11, we know, changed the industry dramatically, and, you know, things dried up. And I think in some ways, you know, you have to look at yourself and you have to evaluate yourself, right? And you know, probably flying was really interesting, and I got all my licenses, but, you know, probably wasn't worth the struggle at the time, which probably says that I probably wasn't that interested in it. You know, and so kind of came out looking for stuff for probably 9 months, and then fell into an airport gig in Midland, Texas.
So at that point, did you have your degree was in like aeronautical science, or did you have minor in management, or what was your degree?
Good point. I skipped over that.
You did. You know, I didn't know. I assumed they give out diplomas at FIT. I wasn't sure.
I know we're not the diploma mill that we have some diplomas. So yeah, so what it was there, it was aviation management with flight options. So like the flight options kind of like your minor. So like your electives are like commercial pilot, air taxi. I did aerobatics. You have some flight credit hours that goes to your credit hours, and then the core is like business, general business things that you would take, and then you have some other aeronautical kind of things like aircraft systems, meteorology, and then a few like planning things, so like airport planning and design, aviation, airport management, things like that. So it's kind of like a business degree with like a heavier focus on if you're going to work in an airline in an airport as a airport planning consultant kind of base, right?
I want to hit you with a quick question on that. So we do have some listeners that tune in that are aspiring pilots, and I know from the time frame you just described to now, a lot of the airlines have dropped the requirement to have a bachelor's degree or even a higher education degree beyond high school to be a pilot. In your recommendation,
Yes.
Would you, if someone's still going for aeronautical science, would you recommend that they have a backup plan, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a great idea to have a backup plan because, things change. The airline industry particularly is very cyclical. So late 90s was very similar to what kind of it's been the last few years, where at that time it was like there was no regional jets. It was like props, narrow body, wide body. And it was like regional jets coming in. There's going to be all these jobs. You're going to fly jets. All these pilots are retiring. And then September 11th happened. And then it came back up. And then the recession, 08, 09, and it tanked, right? And then it came back. So it's like, it's very cyclical. So if you're a pilot and that's your career, you're going to go through those peaks and valleys like through your career. So yeah, I think it's good to always have a backup, in case you want to pivot, and having a undergraduate degree never hurts. And I think, in my case, going through the flight program was like kind of lockstep with the bachelor degree, right? So you're taking electives. It's not holding you back. I think I got my private in a couple months. I had my commercial license by the time I was 20. It didn't stall, my flying side of things if I wanted to do that. So I think it's well worth it, and it gives you the time and experience where you do have a backup.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting where we see ourselves in the industry now, because the same as you, I grew up around the same time period, getting into aviation. And, back then, I'm sure the same as all our stories, but I had friends who were first out of college, and they're getting paid $17,000 to fly right seat, Beach 1900 or something, and they couldn't even sign for an apartment lease. Their girlfriend or somebody that they knew had to do that. So it is nice to see it change, but I totally agree with your opinion there that a backup plan is good, because if you spend enough time in the industry, it does seem to revolve and change and more from what used to be old is new, and et cetera, et cetera. But thank you for your opinion on that, because like I said, we do get questions on it, and I think people would really like to hear your opinion. So thank you for that. So going back, now you find yourself in Midland, Texas. You're out of college.
So Midland, Texas.
What was your role there?
I was a ops agent.
Ops agent.
Or airport operations agent, I think was the title.
Now, that's the first real exposure you had to working at an airport, or did you do anything back home?
That was my first exposure. I never interned. I never, worked at a fixed base operator on the line or something like that. It was really my first exposure to an airport. It was my first real job, real professional job. I think I was making a whole $26,000 a year or something like that.
That's
right?
amazing.
But yeah, so it was like kind of, and I think even at that point, even going through school and things, like you don't really even know what the gig is, right? But
right.
You kind of have this base. And what's cool and interesting about Midland is it was a small hub commercial, and you do a little bit of everything. So, the big airports, or even airports like where I'm at now, you're very segmented, and there's a security, and there's a operations, and there's landside operations, there's finance, blah, blah, you go down the line. And I think airport like that where, you're doing a little bit of everything. So you're kind of learning a lot of like what's going on. And that's, they moved my way up there, supervisor, and then I'm shift supervisor kind of thing. And then, the ops manager there, and really seeing the airport operations team. And so all of the regulatory and the security things and the runway things and just keeping the airport safe, kind of things was that role.
I've never actually been to Midland. As you know, I've spent some time in Texas in my career, but from the way I think you've described in the past, is it mostly oil? Is that the driving business?
So out there, West Texas is what was the Permian Basin.
Is that okay?
And oil and gas
okay.
runs the show out there.
Okay.
Which is also cyclical, like the aviation department. At the time, I think they were in a bust, so things were cheap. Oil was cheap. Not a lot of jobs. By the time I left there, almost 5 years later, it was back to a boom. Not a lot of places to live, inventory to live, getting expensive, a lot of jobs available. So I think that's how things go out there in Midland, and I think it's probably been pretty stable for a while with oil prices. So.
And then from Midland, you moved to Stockton?
So I had a stop in Fort Worth, Texas.
A stop in Fort Worth. Okay, so you went. Now, I apologize for not knowing this, and you can slap me in the face because you're from Texas. But that would be east of Midland, right? If I'm thinking in my head.
So Fort Worth is east, so it's Dallas, Fort Worth, all one giant metro. That was the city of Fort Worth. So and this will prepare you. I've had a lot of positions. In a lot of different places. So that was the Fort Worth stop. So general aviation.
Makes you a perfect podcast guest, by the way. All that experience.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I was, so I was Jeff Miller at Fort Worth Spinks Airport. We had Fort Worth Spinks Beecham Alliance. Alliance was kind of privately managed by Hillwood. And then the city of Fort Worth ran Beecham and Spinks, two general aviation airports. And I was the airport manager. How
did you like that experience going from what you were really, because it sounded like over 5 years you had a no surprise, if anybody that knows you entered in as an ops agent, is that correct title?
Correct.
And then you worked your way up. So managing at a commercial 139 airport, was it just, did you enjoy it? Was it different? Was it, just curious? And not even necessary to put you on the spot, but obviously, the same here in my own career. I've mostly been at 139 airports, and now I'm strictly at general aviation airport. And there's a lot of things I do like about it. There's some things that I miss, but I'm just curious how you felt there.
Yeah, I think it's the same as you. Like, I think there's some things you missed. Like, remember, you kind of get into this for like the big planes and the excitement, but I think what was interesting about that was there's a lot of growth going on there, and then. Yeah, you learn a lot more in this industry. If you're going to move up, you've kind of got to know a lot of I would call the boring things, like the finance side, the leasing side, the business deal side. And that's why you find a lot of folks in our industry weren't like you and me and went to Embry-Riddle or Florida Tech. They might have, an MBA or a business degree, and, they've carved that path out. So I think that's a piece that you don't get on the ops side. So coming out of college, you want to be like, oh, yeah, airport, I'm so special. I have a bachelor's degree in aviation management. Nobody else can clean up dead birds off the runway and fill out a checklist. I'm a genius, right? So, like, you've got to pivot to continue to, because, for me, it was always, I envisioned wanting to be bigger or higher and not really sure what that was. And so for me to do that, I've got to take that experience on it. I think so. That was a really good, I wasn't there very long, just under 2 years, and got that experience that it would have been hard to kind of get other places. So, you kind of put that under your belt of, experience, right? So.
Absolutely. No. And so at that point, then you went to Stockton.
Then I went to Stockton.
And then you hired the best ops specialist who, I'll be honest, I think I ripped you off now that I'm thinking about it because you were so kind to me as a boss. I think you started me at like 44,000 and I'm like, so twice as much as you made in Midland. So sorry I ripped you off there.
Yeah, I was like, we got to go all in on this guy from Florida. And no, so it was like getting back to commercials small, interesting times.
Did you
very
start Stockton in 2008 or 9? 2009. I got there. I remember I drove through Phoenix on 4th of July, and I got there in 2010 after you had hired me in, which I often refer to as my big boy airport job. So thank you for that. People often see me. If you've seen the artwork on here, if you know who I am, you often think, how could this guy have 25 years experience? He's so young. Most people are like, "What? Would you skip the first 10 years of your working career?" But
I think it was I remember specifically from Stockton. It was very impressive because I think people a lot of times thought like you were my boss or you had more experience because you looked
the lack of hair.
You were like 45, even though you were like 25.
Yeah.
And I do specifically remember that.
I do too. It wasn't knowledge base. You always, as soon as you open your mouth, you're like, "Oh, this guy's in charge."
It's all about perception.
Yeah, it was perception of appearance and lack of hair. It's really where I've gotten to this point in my career is a lack of hair. You have that thick presidential hair, which means you got nowhere to go but up.
I can't help it. It's gotten a lot grayer, but it's still there. But right, Stockton, interesting time. I think you and I meshed really well, right?
We did. I loved the time we spent. I did.
Yeah. I think we had some interesting experiences there, right? Like, I think probably the only time, and probably the only time in my career, and probably the first I've ever heard of somebody, an airport employee getting pulled over and arrested on a taxiway.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember that.
I do. How could you forget it?
I don't know. Like, I haven't come across that across my career, so that was a unique experience, right?
Well, you managed that as a champ.
That too. You were maybe part of that, not the guy getting arrested.
Listen, this is the time of the podcast to tell everyone about my criminal record. Kidding. No, I was a witness. I witnessed the whole thing. It was like a grassy knoll scenario. I was off to the side saying, "This is what I saw." But no, but it's funny because like in Stockton's case, right? It's a 139 airport, but I would say heavily, really at that time at least, general aviation, maybe a little bit of cargo when we were there, but we had Allegiant, right? And so, but Allegiant schedules that everyone knows kind of ebbs and flows with a Tuesday, Thursday schedule, in and out. So most of the time you're not following those stringent rules. And so if you're trying to put everything in that box and work with, the tenants and, things like wearing badges, waiting at gates, speed limits in this case. But I will say, from the time that I started there to the time that I left, I think right before you, the stuff that you did there and put in place. I mean, I see the articles now and I see all the good stuff that they're doing. And I honestly do think you laid the foundation to make that airport a lot better, to function a lot better. Because I think even at the time you were working aggressively to get that airport off of really being subsidized by the county, correct?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think that's a tough part of our job, and I think the smaller airports, especially in what you do, it's a tough thing because the revenue sources aren't there, and then trying to justify these we know, and I know, and the folks that work with us know the economic generators that the airports are, even if they're smaller. It's very hard to frame that to the public, right? And I think you make a good point. It's in that case, trying to make it this self-sustaining enterprise, to keep that economic generator going. Because a lot of times in this industry, people think, well, if Jeff's not at O'Hare or Midway, like what is that? And general aviation, small airports, small hub airport, I mean, they contribute tens and billions of, economic generators across the country and jobs, and people lose sight of that because it's not an airport that they fly through to go to Florida on vacation, so they don't understand it. And I think Stockton fell into that bucket, and it's really about convincing, the region and the public of the generator that it is, and the foundations that we have to set to help that airport be successful, and that it helps the community, right?
Absolutely, and even I think you did a large project. I helped with you a little bit. I know it's mostly your vision, and Sue Palmieri's was the airport director. You ultimately took over as airport director. When I think I came in, you were deputy airport director. Was that your title?
That is correct.
So you guys built out the sterile area, and then we also had our friends at the airlines that would do a whole fiesta in the back where they would cook on hot plates, and you and I had to crack down on that because it wasn't a restaurant. But fun times, and it's funny because these little snippets of your life, and I consider myself not a germaphobe, but close enough to I wash my very. But I remember we used to have in that terminal, so I try to describe this to the listeners. If you picture one of those old candy machines that you put 25 cents in and it dumps out like, I don't know, 10 pieces of candy. And I remember one day I put a quarter in it and you just looked at me with a disgusting look and you're like, you're going to eat that? And I was like, you're right. Like I should, I didn't think about it. And no, I think after that we ended up getting rid of that and I think most people did because it is, if you think about putting your hand in where everybody else did. And it's a small thing, but I kept it with me forever because I was like, he's right. That is disgusting.
Well, and hopefully that's helped you in your career, that seeing that just because we've always done things a certain way or have something doesn't need to be. So just because that old candy machine was in the terminal forever, it doesn't needs to be there. Right?
Absolutely. And I think I've had a healthier life.
A life lesson.
Yeah, a healthier life. It's not only professional advice, but I'm sure it's kept me on my feet since then. All right, so now that we've talked about candy and all the world life you gave me, and I mean, there's so many stories with Stockton. And quite honestly, I don't want to waste all your time. I would love to have you back someday to talk about.
I'd love to be back.
Yeah, because Stockton stuff is great. But I departed to San Jose because I still was on a quest to understand where I wanted to go in my professional life. And then you departed, and I believe you went to Denton, Texas. Is that correct?
Denton, Texas. So, what did you just say about yours? You left because of why did you leave?
I left because I didn't know where I wanted to go with my career, and I think it goes back to something you said earlier. When you first start out in this industry, I think you have this thought like, yeah, I want to run a large airport. And so I went to San Jose because I'm like, that's how I'm going to do it. And everything you talked about with compartmentalization is exactly what kind of happened there, which was fine. It was a good role. But as I evolved and changed over the years, I think really where my mindset has gone is if you're at an airport, it's more about, for me, the governing structure probably than size or different, how much latitude, how much flexibility you have, all the stuff you talked about. So for me, though, at that point in my life, so this would have been around 2012, Jeff, I still didn't know exactly what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go, but it was this appealing part that I was like, hey, this is a big airport. That's cool. I want, to your point earlier, I want to see some cool planes. Not that we had that, was it an MD-80 that we had at Stockton?
Yeah, it was a DC-9.
DC-9 with a bed in the back that the mechanic slept in.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, that's another time for that.
Another time, we get, we could have a whole podcast on Stockton stories, Stockton stories.
Not just at the airport. I think just living there, it was in the Great Recession. It was ground zero. I mean,
it was
quite the amount of experiences we had there, both in and out of the airport.
The greater San Joaquin area, right? Now known for such things.
Central Valley, California.
It was. I mean, it wasn't as big of a winery place back then, but it is now up in Lodi.
It is.
So, anyways, you left for Denton, Texas.
I left. So maybe similar to you, like I think the next section that you're going to make me talk about.
I probably will.
I think trying to figure things out on where I'm at, like almost maybe like a midlife career crisis and trying to figure things out. So I felt like I did everything I could in Stockton, and Stockton really was in a tough position, right? And had an opportunity to come back to North Texas. For some reason, like I end up back in North Texas. I don't know why. But I ended up back in North Texas and with this opportunity, and again, another general aviation airport, in the Metroplex, growing, tremendous growth in Texas, even at that time, 2013.
It's interesting because you hit a point in your career early on where you really got to the top, because I'll say for me, later on after you, when I became airport director in Laredo, I think I had some of that realization too. That I was like, well, what's next? This is what I've always wanted. I wanted to be this. So what's next?
Well, and yeah, and then maybe like similar, where I was director, you and I met deputy, you moved out, I was director for another 2 years and then decided to go. But I think the tough part is like, I don't think anybody really prepared me for that, right? Like I never had, I had some mentorship, but like, not sure I was really ready for that political environment. And, I think I started to look at what do I want to do and go back and kind of, in some ways take a step back and looking at a high growth area, growing airport, looking at possibly going to a commercial airport, which was exciting. And finding that, I think I quickly found out that, that wasn't the right move. Right. And, we make mistakes and it was a good group of people and left on good terms, but a brief experience there for under 2 years. And, I really questioned what I was going to do and what did I want to do. And this airport thing was getting frustrating. And I have been doing it for, at that time, like 12 years. And was, so I ended up, we talked about Allegiant at Stockton, ended up always kind of wanted to be in an airport or airline, originally from the pilot side and now like, what is the corporate side? Looks interesting. Went there.
And that would have been Las Vegas, right? That's where you were.
Las Vegas.
So based out of. I would assume. I don't want to say. Well, yeah, cultural shift. I'm sure. I mean, not. I think we all have good relationships with our airline partners, but in the United States, especially, there's some like where you're at now. You guys are your hub, and you have some control over that. But a lot of airports, right, similar to Stockton or like Laredo. The negotiation is so much on the side of the airline because you just really want them to service you, and so does every other airport. So I would assume the cultural shift for you, mentality wise, how was that for you?
Oh yeah, I mean it was a huge shift because you're on the other side, and then you're on this new side that is not a legacy carrier, not a Southwest, but one of the highest profit margins in the world, high functioning business, lot of growth, a lot of new airports, a lot of planes coming in and, being a part of that. So I was in stations and had certain stations across the country and, traveling to those and working they were in Summerlin in Las Vegas, and that's where the headquarters was. And ended up with the West Coast bases and the LA and the Honolulu and the Las Vegas and those airports. And really interesting because it was really a lot of fun. I mean, it's probably the most fun I've had at a job. A really great group of people that I still stay in contact with that have worked there as well.
Now, I mean, we have a lot of people that listen that are in the industry, so they understand it. But those that maybe don't, right? And I know you've touched on this a lot, and it reminds me because as we're talking over here, I can see over your shoulder that there's an Allegiant model there. What was it, A320?
I do still have I have an Allegiant model.
Yeah. But the same as their slogan, right? What's their exact slogan? We're not just a travel company, or we're not an airline. Something.
Yeah, I don't know what it like. Back then, it was like something like travel is our deal. I don't know what it is now.
So the kind of the overarching theme of Allegiant, and you've touched on this with some of their profitability, because I think obviously COVID was a weird time. I don't think any airline made profit at that point, but up to then, I think you had said this before that Allegiant had a profit every quarter, correct?
Yeah, I think they were consistently profitable. They operated very different than the big carriers. They did stuff where we might have a group that's doing a bunch of stuff where a big carrier might have 100 people doing that work. So they kind of did things a lot different. And I was reminded by my coworkers who a lot of them came from legacy carriers. And, it's like airlines don't run this way. And I think it's, a lot of why, it made it a little exciting. There was a lot of action, a lot of problems to solve. a lot of travel, and you know, your company's trying to save. It's just like any smaller business, and you know, or startup business or something like that, where you're saving costs, you're trying to, you know, make a profit, and yeah, it was an interesting time.
And I butchered this, and you just pretty much hit it. But I'm going to butcher it again because of what I'm trying to remember the exact. But the spirit of what they are, because I would have meetings with them and stuff as well when I worked in Laredo. Is they're not an airline, they're a travel company of sorts. So they sell their whole business model, right? They have a hotel now in Florida. They're really banking on the fact that if you're booking a ticket, you're using them for the rental and the hotel and all that, and that increases the profitability margin. Did I hit that
Yeah, I
right?
think at the time, and I think things have changed with them.
Okay.
I haven't stayed too connected, but it generally I think is still the same. And at the time, it was really they said the competition was the couch, right? Like it was Jeff wasn't going to fly to Las Vegas, but it's so cheap. Like he's just gonna fly out there. And
He's got penny slot money. This guy,
he's
look at
got
him.
penny slot money ready to go. Or he was gonna round the whole family up in the National Lampoon's
The family truckster
wagon, and they were gonna drive down to Florida. But it's $40, so they can take them all, and it's super cheap. So it was really, they were about stimulating, you know, travel rather than trying to steal you from a United or American or Southwest or something like that. So it worked really well, and they went into smaller communities, smaller cities, and then they connect them to the Vegas and the Orlando and the Florida airports for vacations, right?
Yeah.
You're not getting business travelers or anything like that.
Well, I'd say kudos to them for doing that in the sense of, we talked a little bit about this in the last episode, but the category of airports that there are in the United States and the fact that there's a lot of 139 airports that don't have an immense amount of commercial service, primarily, things change, but deregulation after 1978. And so, again, you would probably know better, but I remember them saying to us somewhere, I thought around the 83% range of all of their domestic routes in the U.S. don't have direct competition. So if they're going from like Laredo to Vegas, there's no direct competition. I mean, obviously you could do a connection if you're on an American or United type of thing, but their routes generally don't have any direct competitors. I know, to your point, it seems like they've shifted a little bit and they've gone into some larger hub airports, so that may have changed over the years, but.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of like what we would call the ultra low cost carriers model now, and Allegiant was probably the first or one of the first ones to do that. And I think you're right, and I think that's now grown, and you have actually people from Allegiant that have broken off, like a Velo or a Breeze, Sun Country. They've kind of taken some of that DNA from when they were at Allegiant and applied it, out there. So it's a model that, has been around for, I think, the 90s, and it works. And in some ways it's a little more recession proof because they're so lean, they're so low cost, they're, the way they do business that they can draw down if need be. That's why you see these carriers fly a couple days a week. That's why you see them seasonal, or there's one of them out there, that is constantly changing, and 6 months later they pull out of your community. They've got a lot of really brilliant people planning these and network planning and revenue and making these decisions, and trying to stimulate the market.
I could talk to you all day long about Allegiant because you have such great insights on it. And I'll bring you back on that. But you have a big, large airport to run, and I have so many other questions to ask you. So I'll keep moving on this time frame. But okay, so at this point, we have parted ways. I was working in South Bend, Indiana, and then transitioned out of there to another airport, which we'll talk about here in a second. But you were at Allegiant, and then our paths crossed again. So this would have been probably around... And you tell me I'm off here, but I think you were at Allegiant at this point that whole time until our paths crossed again in around, was it 2017?
Yeah, and I had a pit stop in Oakland.
That's right. I missed Oakland. I'm sorry. So you went back to California.
This was and I wouldn't recommend this in your career, but I'm not job hopping and it's not of interest. A lot of these, like I said, have left on good terms, and a lot of these have some personal things tied to them. And, we'll skip through Oakland. Oakland was a good experience.
Well, I will say for Oakland, because as I mentioned earlier, I worked at San Jose, and I think one of the realities they're Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, great airports, great people. I think one of the harder things in our industry is the salary point, and when for like me at San Jose, you have to do something. At least at the time, I was a duty manager there, and a little unorthodox. I ended up living on a boat. In Redwood City.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and I had ideas in my mind of Don Johnson and an alligator, and it ended up being bald Jeff Miller and falling off the back with a bag of Jack in the Box into the San Francisco Bay. But I think when you go there, right, whether it's Oakland or not, I would say this: if you were an alien and you came to the Earth, you probably would pick California to live in. It's a beautiful area. It's just the pricing.
It's a beautiful area.
Yeah.
I love California. It's, yeah.
Well, we laugh about it on my side of the world, and I would say the same for probably Oakland, because I have some friends that even work there now, is when we go to these conferences, there's so many people that used to work at San Jose. And I was like, it's really nothing against the airport itself. It's a great airport. It's a great area. It's just, it's hard when you start thinking about your future, especially if you're thinking of family and stuff, and how are you going to be able to afford a home? Where are you going to be able to do that at? I mean, it's just that, and that's not a fault of the airports. It's just the economy out there. But
yeah, and I think ultimately, personal things happen, and was a good group of people, and had an opportunity that came up from a personal side, made a lot more sense at the time.
So you were in Oakland, and I had left South Bend and went to Pittsburgh, and I was working in Pittsburgh at the time. And our paths crossed where you became the vice president of the Allegheny County Airport. Is it AGC?
Correct. Yeah.
Correct. Okay. AGC. And so that was 2017. So, we had stayed in contact up to that point. And then, you were there, which was great. I mean, at that point, I considered you a friend. And it was great to have you and work with you again. I mean, I was up at the commercial airport, and you were down at the general aviation one. But at the time, you were doing a lot. I mean, you were in most. I mean, where your trajectory went with Pittsburgh. I mean, obviously they saw your potential and they pulled you into the commercial side. I mean, rightfully so. You had all this immense experience at that point, plus Allegiant, all this stuff that really priorities it seemed like they wanted to do. And why not tap that immense resource of your brain?
No, thanks. And I think there was a lot going on at the time, and I think you probably helped me a little bit to get out there, and it was so it's Pittsburgh was growing the airports, right? Which is an interesting challenge out there, because the region's not really growing and the population's not really growing, and Pittsburgh was doing some good things, right? And the city was doing some good things, but generally companies are moving to more business friendly climates, like here in Texas, in the Southeast, so, the airport's usually tied to those things, right? So there was some good things going on, and, they continue to do some good things.
Absolutely. But, when I moved there, I'll be the first to say, geography-wise, I mean, people that are listening to this podcast can say, he didn't know Midland was... Wait, I actually did, because I got it right. It's west of Fort Worth. But I didn't know exactly Pittsburgh in relation to West Virginia and Ohio and exactly where it sat.
I did not either.
I had a general idea that it was towards New York.
Towards New York, it's like, yeah.
Well, and they've stopped doing this, but I remember at the time when I was in South Bend, I applied for the job. And, a lot of times you apply for stuff. Sometimes you hear things. I thought I liked it. Other people were like, that's weird. But they sent me a postcard. They sent me a postcard with the terminal on it. and they said, thanks for applying. We have your application resume, whatever, however that worked. And they're like, if you meet the qualification, we'll be in touch. I was like, that's a nice little touch. You get a little postcard out of it. And it was, they had the hotel there. When I went into the interview, everybody was great. And I think it was exciting to get out there. The communities, the topography of Pittsburgh really creates these pockets of communities that have their own identity. And so I lived out in Coriopolis. I think you lived down in McDonald, correct?
Yeah, like South Fayette. Like you said, what was interesting about that part of the country is it's all townships it's like Commonwealth.
Right.
It's like, you drive to the next town and they plow the road at 10 a.m. and not at 6 a.m.
Right.
It's just, and there's volunteer firefighters. So it's just like a different, from living in Texas and California and Florida and I'm from New York, it's like it was a different world, I guess.
Well, and I think I want to say to your point, because it's a Commonwealth, everybody has their own governing structure. I want to say at Pitt and AGC, there was something like 140 mutual aid agreements of an MOU about.
I would not be surprised about that.
Right, and so my departure ticket was stamped from Pittsburgh. I haven't been shy about that. I was my employment there was ended, and so at that point for me, I was trying to figure out what am I going to do. I had a house in Pittsburgh, and then it's one of those things too, right? If you're in your career, and I've been upfront about it because I say this in my career now, especially if you get to the point where you're running an airport, if you haven't been terminated, you're probably either going to be down the road, or you already have in the past. And so, but I think you take everything a little bit and change a little bit about what you look at your management style. But from there, I departed and went to Laredo. And you stayed on, I think, for at least a couple more years. Is that correct?
Couple more years, yeah. So I think from that, they're building that terminal, and there's some exciting stuff from that. And I think part of that area and the airport took that on identity is they have a bit of a swagger that they don't care that they're a smaller mid-sized city, right? Like, and I think that's a good lesson learned for all of us, that you don't have to be a New York or LA or Chicago to change things and do things. And I think that was an interesting lesson for me, coming from a lot of smaller places, in a small airline and things like that a a lot of times it's very easy for you to fall in that trap.
Absolutely.
Well, they're bigger, so they're obviously smarter.
Right. So. No, you're absolutely. And, it's interesting because with Pittsburgh, especially when I look at like the conference circuit, conference have popped up there more recently. And the people that I talked to were so excited because it was something new, something different, right? And that, you see these, nothing against like Las Vegas and stuff. I mean, obviously they have the corner on conventions. If you're going to do a big one, you're probably going to do it there because the logistics are good. But, getting into one of these, like Grand Rapids, they had the ACI annual there. It was cool to experience something maybe that you normally don't see especially if you're trying for business or even for pleasure. I've had people, kind of mention, and, when you talk about like baseball fields, I know the Pirates don't have the best record as a team, but the field itself is amazing. I know you and I used to go a lot to out to the Giants, and then I think it depended on how much money we had. Now you pay me a good amount; we've already established that. But if you went to the Giants game, it was $55 for bad seats, and if you went to an Oakland A's game, it was $10, and you got a beer and a hot dog.
And the restrooms might flood with sewage.
Yeah.
Coliseum.
Exactly.
It was a beautiful. It reminded me a lot of the ballpark in San Francisco. It was right on the river. And,
it was. And so I moved off to Texas, and not saying you followed me because I left before you got there, but you went to Texas. You went to Texas to run a much larger airport. I was down in Laredo, which for those people that don't know is right on the southern border. And so we obviously we stayed in contact through that period, but. You left Pittsburgh to come in as I apologize. Was it deputy airport director? Or was it?
Here was assistant.
Assistant airport director. Okay.
Yeah.
And you were in that role for about a year.
About 10, 11 months, something like that. Yeah.
And
Not
then you
long.
found yourself running the largest medium hub airport in the country.
And then I became interim, and it stuck. And then 2.5 years later, yeah, I mean, I think it, and I think it's what's interesting about here and how I got here is like there is no like roadmap like on how things happen. And you talked about this like in you went through difficult situations, and I think coming out of college, like you want to have this like roadmap of like I go here and then I move up and I stay here 10 years and then I'm this, and it's like it doesn't always happen that way, right? I spent crisscrossing the country for some reason for a long time, and it worked out. And I think things happen for a reason, and I'm here for a reason, and I think the good thing, and you've done this yourself. You moved around a lot. You learned a lot of things. I think it's been a lot more accepted the last 5 to 10 years and post pandemic that people do change jobs and move. Because early on in my career, that was like a big red flag. Like, why did you leave? And why have you had 3 jobs in 10 years? And what is wrong with you? And it's become a lot more accepting, and it's built who I am and why I'm here, and I'm doing these things here. And I'm in Dallas, Texas, at this airport.
It's interesting you say that because I have felt the shift myself. I think earlier on, probably both in our careers, there was a different mentality about how long, our parents' generation and, how long they spent at a job. But also that changed too, right? Because when we came into this, what our parents maybe had with pensions and stuff were no longer the case, right? The companies themselves changed how they saw employees, right? There no longer was this, hey, spend 30 years here, get a pension, get a gold watch type of mentality. And I went through the same thing where people could look at it and say, you've jumped a lot, but now I don't hear that anymore. When I have people look at my resume, they often, they're like, oh, like if you're, progressively, like you said, depending on what you're doing in your life, either you want to downshift, to change, maybe your understanding of something, or you're elevating, or you're just changing, the what exactly you're doing. I mean, in aviation, you look at your history with airports, you had your stint with the airlines, which gives you, I would feel, especially running a place like Dallas Love, a well-rounded view of you understand the airline side to it, you understand the airport side. And so looking at your resume, the experience that you've gained, I think makes you that much better of an airport director.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I think we all have a different story to tell, right?
Yeah.
And like, I've had people, and especially, some of the younger folks and come out and whatever, Gen Z, and like people want to like follow your blueprint and like how you did it. It's like, you don't, like, I don't know how, I don't have a blueprint. I don't know how this happened. It's a mixture of luck and being in the right opportunity and preparing yourself and having the right experience. Like, there is no blueprint.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like especially when you're younger, right? And I was the same way. You get so involved with the end result of whatever you think is the epitome of your career that by the time you get to the point where you're like, this is what I've always really wanted. And I do, like my job today, I love my job and I love what I do. But I look back on like our experiences, what we're just talking about, like at Stockton and stuff, and I have such fond memories of that time. And, I guess if I was to give advice to somebody young in that case is enjoy the journey, because, you may, and again, keep your eye on the goal, but, the little things, the laughs that you and I have had over the years and things that we do at the airports, it's something that as you start to look over your career and say, hey, this is what I've done. Those are the things that mean more to me than titles or where I was or what I was doing, was people like you, people that I've met along the way that, like I said, I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. I mean, we do usually, we're just not on a microphone. But so to finish up with the Dallas Love stuff, so you're managing a large airport. I know you have executive, the Vertiport. What do you see coming up in the future? I know we have TSA Real ID on May 7th. That's something maybe that I don't know if you're preparing your checkpoints for that and stuff, but eVTOLs, all this type of stuff that could be emerging. How do you feel about the industry where we're at now, how it's looking? How do you oversee your own huge network of aviation system there?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we're in this, like, we talked about it being cyclical. Like, we're back in these, like, kind of unknown times. Like, there's some interesting things coming in the pipeline, like these eVTOLs and flying taxis. And, my personal opinion is the scale of those is a long way, the next decade out. But they'll be flying around here in the next few years. And how do we, manage those and integrate those? And then, there's the typical, legislative, regulatory things coming out, right? The real ID stuff. Who knows how that's gonna, a lot of the states have it. Texas has been done with it, but we're people coming from other states, and maybe they get through their state and they come here, and how are you managing that? So just preparing for anything like that. The administration changed, right? There's a lot of discussion on our side of it, from our regulatory bodies like FAA and TSA, DOT, those changes and grant funding and money and how that all works. So it's like really, being tuned into how those things are going. But it's just a period in time that, where there's a lot of changes, and then it'll smooth out again, and, we'll pivot again and keep moving. And I think from my perspective, we'll save it for another show, but we are a federally restricted facility, that only airport in the country that is capped on how many gates it can build. So I can't build more gates. So how do I grow this airport and that becomes a unique thing, and we're going through a master plan process to address that. And but those types of things, really, as we move forward, you lean on your experiences that you had, and you lean on your team and the people you've met. And, I think I call you for advice sometimes, right? On things. And
yeah, usually when I'm at those penny slots, Hey, Jeff.
Catch you. No, it's just things are changing, right? And there's not, I can't predict how I navigate it, and I'll probably make mistakes or say this wrong thing, and that's okay, but it happens, and we continue to move on. But there's just, in this area, it's interesting because everybody's moving to North Texas. I think Texas is growing quite a bit. Austin's kind of calmed down a little bit, but North Texas, Dallas Fort Worth continues. I think we had like the most houses like bought or something like that, recently, and it's us in Florida, everybody's moving there, and how do you accommodate that growth? And it's very interesting here because it's things are slowing down across the country, potential recession, and it's like it's still going. My home value is still going up. People are still moving here, and how do we navigate that? Because we seem to be a little bit insulated from things, but that could change. So how are we prepping for that? How are we prepared if we do go into a recession? How are we impacted? How's the airport ready for that? And we just have to be thinking about those things.
No, absolutely. I mean, you have a beautiful one terminal, and your community is amazing. You got a lot of, you said, growth and potential there. Not potential even from what you've already done, and you being Southwest being your predominant carrier, and we've all seen the news, that the changes that they've made, which I think as kind of a consumer, when you're like, for me, I grew up in Michigan. And so O'Hare actually was kind of the primary airport we would fly out of. So usually it was United American, just the way it evolved. I never really I didn't get a ton of opportunity to fly Southwest. And so, even I know my mother, after I started flying Southwest, I had to explain to my mom, and I'm like, it's different. I was like, they don't have tickets. They have polls and numbers. And I was like, the easy way for me to remember is A, you're good. B, better luck next time, and C, you're getting a center seat. But all that's changed, right? And now they're looking more like one of the core. I mean, they're one of the four majors, right, in the U.S. and the other three legacy airlines. I think now, as it starts to shape out, looks a little more similar to that. But I would assume just even with your own terminal, right? I mean, now that like I said, if you don't understand the industry, you would see those metal poles with numbers on them and stuff like, what is this? And it's an interesting concept. But now you find yourself in a position where, do you guys are you just working with Southwest on kind of their initiatives? Do you have to do things within the terminal, or are they kind of taking care of, I don't know if it's a rebrand necessarily, but, just changing maybe some of those things. And, even I would assume, and I could be wrong on this, your baggage system had to be one of the most robust, because you probably handled more bags than most airports, right? Because they used to fly for free.
No, it's a good point. So we have a couple points to that. Like, we have the highest gate utilization in the country. So what that means is we're restricted. There's a lot bigger market than we can accommodate. So Southwest particularly wants to turn or bring that plane into the gate, get the people off, get them on, get them out as quick as possible, right? And we do that a lot more than you would typically do on a gate. So then all the systems are kind of tied into that. So yes, the system, the bag system has to be on point. It has to be the ticketing, everything out, the roadway, the parking lots have to handle that volume. And those are things that we're looking at the master plan process of how do we, continue to be able to squeeze more and more out of these gates. Typically an airport like us would have 50, 70, 80, 90 gates. We have 20. So how do we do all this to support that? And I think from Southwest is changing. And I think they don't know, and we're not really sure what that means. We know that there's a lot of smart people over there, and they're figuring things out. And we, again, are a little insulated just because our unconstrained forecast, we would call it, is significantly higher than our constraint. So I'm sure Southwest would love to do more flights and more destinations out of here, but they physically can't do that. So as things slow down, or as things change with them, maybe some of their other stations, take some dips or some cuts or stagnant growth. And I think we'll still see some of that. We're not immune to it, but we're a little more insulated because we're artificially constrained. It's economics, it's supply and demand. As this area grows, DFW is right down the road. It's a great airport. It's a global fortress hub for American.
New leader, right? Chris McLaughlin, is that how you say his last name?
New leader, Chris over there, and congratulations to him. And we've got a great partnership with them. North Texas uses both airports, we try to do as many things as we can here at Love Field, and
I often,
our other facilities.
Yeah.
We have a general aviation reliever, just like Mr. Miller here is airport relieving traffic from the Chicago Metro land, whatever you call it up there.
Well, if you ask a lot of the old timers around here, they like to call it Palwaukee, which when I grew up in Michigan, Palwaukee, I honestly thought it was derived from Native American, like a tribe or something that was, originally on this land. But I guess what it is it's more simple than that. There's two roads that intersect here, and it's Palatine and Milwaukee. But I digress. Most people don't want to know too much about the names. We'll do another. We have so much to talk about. We could do so many of these episodes. So you have Dallas Executive, and then the Vertiport, that's associated with your convention center downtown, correct?
Yeah, it's actually downtown convention center. The convention center is actually getting rebuilt. City of Dallas got huge project, multi-billion-dollar convention, great project. So it's going to get taken down, and then we're going to rebuild it, and we're still working through what that looks like. And big part of that is what we were just talking about, the future, the eVTOLs, the flying taxis, and how does that be a part of it? So
it is interesting. I sit on the Advanced Air Mobility Working Group. The state of Illinois was so kind to invite me to be a part of it. And, we're actually writing the manual for it here because United had made an announcement with Archer in this year, 2025, to fly from O'Hare to the downtown heliport in Chicago, which, aggressive timeline, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. But it took a lot of people by surprise, and officials too, right? To say like, hey, wait a second, can we actually, how are we going to incorporate this into the system? So as we're designing the plan, I like to say the chicken before the egg thing. I think, when I was at San Jose, TNC's really creeped up, went from a ton of taxis to nobody really kind of saw this Uber Lyft thing coming. And then that completely changed, the layout of a landside terminal. So I wouldn't be surprised, either way, I guess, if it takes longer for it to mature. I guess in my own mind, I always think we will see it mature in a country like Brazil or China or somewhere where it's less regulatory restrictions. And if I see that happening, then my own personal opinion is now we'll really see it start happening in the U.S. But I could be off on that.
I think you're right, Jeff. I mean, I think we get asked this question a lot.
Yeah.
I think in our industry, and I think if you look at our industry and the reason aviation's so safe in the U.S. is there's a lot of kind of red tape to go through to make sure that it's safe. And I know a lot of these are backed by kind of, you'd say tech kind of people that have probably different, regulatory environment. And they have awesome ideas and they're interesting and it looks like a great idea. But, I think we have to be realistic on the timeline. And that gives us more time to prepare and prep for these things because they're not going to be flying Ubers around thousands of trips a day from our airports next year. So it's going to take some time to scale. And like you said, it will probably scale in other places first, and then you'll start to see it pop up here and we'll be ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kept you on this podcast for over an hour just for an opportunity for you to tell me I'm right. So now that we've hit that milestone.
It doesn't happen a lot, but no, you are right.
It doesn't. It doesn't. I have to get people there. It takes a long time to get them to that point. So I know you have a lot of love for love. But if, let's say, is there something in your career, is there an airport, is there an airline? We didn't talk a lot about your flying experience, but you are an aerobatic certificated pilot, right?
I don't fly much or hardly ever, but yeah.
Is there, if let's just say nothing was, you could do whatever you wanted, and maybe it's not even aviation, but is there an airport that you would say that would be cool? Is there, would you want to start a flight operation of some kind? I know in the past, and this is somewhat of a leading question, that I think you might have had some stuff lined up in Alaska that I don't know if that was a vision of yours at some point, but.
Yeah, I think, it's hard to look back and then say, like, I regret this or, I don't look at things that way. I think industry, like where I've come, I don't know if it would be a specific place or specific airport, but kind of to your point, like before, earlier in this, when we were talking about money, and it's not always about that. There's jobs in this industry that pay a lot, and there's jobs that are really cool, and they're run by a municipality, and they're pretty low paying. So I think for me, it's having those experiences like maybe you and I had at Stockton, or the guys I met at Allegiant, or some of the challenges I've had here at Love Field. And, I think taking those and then placing them like at the perfect airport in the perfect part of the country, that you'd want to live and everything and have the salary, that would be the ideal. And I think it's just finding that, what is right for you at that point in your life. Like, I think if you and I were in Stockton, we'd probably be like, we're going to be at like LAX running. And then you work through it and it's like, well, maybe like as you get super big, it's not always the right fit for you because it's more of a bureaucratic kind of thing. I think for me, and probably for you and a lot of others, we like being in the mix of things. And I like knowing the people and I like seeing the day-to-day stuff where some of these, they're just huge, massive places, and you might lose touch with that. Not all of them, but and that would be my fear. Is not going to that, running into that scenario. But yeah, I think it's a mixture of everything, the good pieces of your career, and then can you recreate that? Is there a way to like recreate that somewhere?
Well, I love that, and I would say too, I've seen this with you, and quite honestly, I think you can change an organization. I've seen the way people respond to you, and I think, even if if someone has attributes like you do, and you find yourself at the helm of a place, that you can build a lot of that. Like I said, do you think you can find yourself where things are so removed, but sometimes, again, someone like you coming in can change that narrative. And I saw you do it in Stockton. I saw you do it with the teams in Pittsburgh. I mean, I'm not closely related to Love, but I know a lot of your folks. I see them at conferences and stuff, and they're a great team, and they always speak very highly of you. And again, I could only say that if anybody ever asked me, I think that you are the number one in this industry. So just so you know, you have a lot of people backing you, and I think you create a lot of that environment yourself at these airports, and you make people a cohesive team. And I would add to that, part of what I've been talking about in this podcast is I'm going to probably purchase a plane here in the near future. So maybe we can make a promise to each other that if I end up doing that, you can get current, and then we'll go buy $100 hamburger somewhere, maybe like a Meacham.
I would, yeah. I think that's a deal. I will get current for
that's that. That's a deal. Okay, perfect.
That airplane. And I do appreciate you propping me up. I really do, and I think I think what I've learned through this is like you could do a lot of damage or you could do a lot of good. When it comes down to it, you running what you're running and I'm running what I'm running, the stupid saying in our industry is like, you've seen one airport, but the core functions just scale. So really what I'm doing is not a lot different than when I was in Midland or in Stockton or what you're doing. And I think we lose sight of that in this industry sometimes. It's the core functions and those never change. It's like, if I have a JV football team, it's no different than the Dallas Cowboys in some ways, right? You have
right.
A head coach and an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator, and it's just NFL versus junior varsity, right? And so I think we miss that, and I think that's where, for me, I've gone through some pretty interesting experiences, and I know you have for sure, and you don't want to repeat those. And you think back of the days when you were the ops agent or you're the low level, and you think of what the director was or what the CEO was, and you think about when you run into them in the hallway, what you say to them can impact their day. And so thinking on a broad scale, you're in the same boat as the head and the director, the executive director, the CEO, whatever title. You have a lot of control to make things better and more interesting for people. We're not changing, the world here. We're running airports. We're not solving world hunger and, world peace. We're just running airports. But like, you can make the people's day better. They can enjoy. They can be proud of where they work. We can do some good things for the economy in the region and things. And they're all positive things. We just got to remember that and not let our egos get in the way sometimes. So.
No, I think that's perfect advice. I love that. And, I often say, I think a non-experience sometimes can be the best experience for someone traveling because, to your point in our industry, if the restaurant's good and the Wi-Fi is good and the bathrooms are cleanly and, the terminal has good flow and the security checkpoint was good, your parking was fine, all that stuff, really people don't take notice in the sense that, like you guys, you have a great terminal, and the experience that you get, a lot of times people don't go and say, hey, I love this, I love that. They get upset when something goes wrong, right? And you don't go to the airport to go to the airport. You go to the airport because you want to go see loved ones or you're going for business. And so that experience, a lot of times, if you create a non-experience because your terminal was so good and well thought out and planned, and you have leaders like you in it, people knowing that you never existed is sometimes the biggest compliment there ever can be because you did your job right and you got them where they needed to go.
You're absolutely right.
Oh, that's twice. Okay, one last question for you because you have a big, large airport to run, and I'm not going to occupy any more of your time on this Friday. I mentioned to some folks that I was going to talk to you, and then they're like, oh, how about a silly question? So how about a silly question for you? If clouds were flavored, what do you think cumulus would taste like?
Clouds. I would say, probably a marshmallow.
See, that's interesting. I was kind of going there, but then maybe because cumulus, I was like, well, maybe like a cucumber. I don't know. But you know what? Marshmallow's good. No, a little humor at the end there. Not that we haven't had a bunch of that here to begin with. I've been doing this whole podcast in my Burger King town for Patrick here. Anyways, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to sit down and go with us and be our first guest here on Destination Aviation. Is there anything I didn't ask you or anything you'd like to say? Mike is yours.
I will say thank you again for inviting me. I had a lot of fun. I would love to come back. We have some other topics I'd love to talk to you about, or if you're interested. And I think what you're doing is great, Jeff. You don't see this a lot. I think you're having. I haven't listened to all of yours because you just shared. I will let everybody know you just shared this with me that you had this secret for like 2 years.
I've had a secret,
but I have listened to some of yours, and I think you've got a great concept and you have a lot of fun. And it's not the typical like boring topics we sometimes find. So when you get into things like this, I think you're doing a great job, and thank you for sharing this with me, and thank you for inviting me and having me on, and I'd love to be a part of this again.
Well, I really appreciate that, Patrick, and I will just say I told you it did seem like a dirty secret, like I'm in Podcasters Anonymous. Hi, I'm Jeff Miller. I'm a podcaster. But, again, I think through the whole process, I wanted to, you're putting a lot of yourself out there. And so I wanted, one, to kind of see what people just had to say generally. And then secondly, if I was going to talk to someone of your esteem, I don't want to just be babbling out of my mouth left and right. And so thanks for everything. And I think we've reached the final destination in this interview. So pick up anything you may have put in that seat back pocket. Well, that was quite enjoyable, I have to say, at least for myself. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation with Patrick Carreno, the head of the Dallas airport system, and many other things that we've discovered in today's episode. So once again, thank you for everyone for tuning in. As we've said in the past, if you like the podcast, tell a friend. If you hate it, tell 3 or 4 enemies. And write it somewhere how great it is. But please do a shout out for us. We would greatly appreciate it as we continue to try to grow the market and the audience here. And if you have your own ideas, there's things you want to see, maybe you want to be a guest on the podcast yourself, feel free to drop us a line at any time at dapodcast85@gmail.com. Try to get to every message that I get in, so feel free to send over anything that you care to say. I'm an open ear. And, I would once again thank everybody, and until next time, my friends, I will see you down the runway.